without jihad. This is the black man's real religion. Real well. That you had no religion until the 7th century A.D. This is the black man's true religion. I got nothing against you. Join anything you want to. But you convert it into everything that touches your life. Waste your time and your money must become an instrument of your liberation or thrown into the ash can of history. You got no time, no. This is the least original of the world's religions. It came into being so fast, moving to a vacuum created by the corruption of Christianity by the Romans. It had to take a few saints from Zoroastrianism, a few saints from Judaism, until it had put itself together. It's a composite religion. Right. Now, one of the reasons why we have not understood this in relationship to the whole concept of race in Europe, we have not understood Nile Valley civilizations. Too many times we use color, but we should concentrate on culture. Okay. It matters less than a damn whether all Egyptians were pure black. All right. I have not made that claim. That is not the claim that's being made. The idea is that these were people in the main who came from the physical body of Africa. And no European would come all the way to Africa and build a civilization of this nature before they built a shoe in Europe or a house with a window. If the first book appeared in Europe around 1250 BC, written by someone named Homer, and we're not too clear whether Homer was man or woman. Now, that civilization was old and in decline by then. The pyramids and the Sphinx was already there. The Hebrew entry has come and gone. So we keep arguing who built the Sphinx. People say slaves built it. No slaves has ever been this skillful in human history. You can go to the pyramids right now, and those blocks of stone are so close together, they've been there 5,000 years, you can't even launch a playing cart in the seams. They've got no bonding agent. Slaves don't have this skill. What benefit is to a slave to do a thing like that? Tell me. Now, the mulattoization of Egypt began with the Hebrew entry in the 17th century, 1700 BC. It continued with the Hittites, Shepherd King, 1600. And after this period, 1,000 years of some kind of peace, and the Assyrians came, 1666. The Iranians, 550 BC. The Iranians were so bad that Africans cried out, "Oh God, if you can't send me a liberator, send me a conqueror that will show mercy." Now you know what happened when the little Greek, Alexander the so-called Great, knocked at the door. Now this was the first purely European aggression. And he wasn't that aggressive because it wasn't necessary. He was to some extent a benevolent conqueror. A first-rate diplomat, a second-rate warrior, but that's another lecture. But he did open the door for the ultimate appearance of the Romans. All right, we're dealing with racism now. And this is something we've got to deal with. The Romans and the Greeks were smug and exclusive, but they were not racist in the present sense, although Aristotle said quite a number of things that can be interpreted as racism and might well be racism. Prejudice in itself and preference in itself is not racism. The racism that we are dealing with right now came out of the 15th and the 16th century. The rise of Europe after the Middle Ages, the Crusades, and the beginning of the slave trade in the 15th and the 16th century. This is what we got to really deal with. Europe, during the Crusades, partly religious, partly hustlerism, partly a raping party.
Right.
But after this was over, famines, plagues, Europe had lost almost 1/3 of its population. They're looking for an outlet. During the Crusades, they had found some things over and above anything they'd seen in Europe. Fine fabrics, beautiful designs. They brought these things back into Europe with the Africans, Arabs, and the Berbers controlling Spain from 711. They've discovered something called soap. They began to use things. The Africans and the Arabs and the Berbers had preserved the maritime skill coming from China, the leading maritime nation of that day. Some of this information fell into the hands of Prince Henry of Portugal, called Henry the Navigator, although there's no evidence that he ever navigated anything. With the birth of European maritime skill, putting boats out to sea, Europe started looking for Asia and the sweets and spices of Asia. Something to put on that gosh darn awful European food so they could eat it. Now they wanted a rationale for what they were doing. The rationale that they were using for the Crusades now extended into the rationale for the conquest of other people. Manifest destiny, divine white right. If you're not using it, it belongs to me. Come on. Now, the Africans and the Arabs argue among themselves that lost part of Spain. Spain and Portugal would go to the Pope to settle a dispute. 1455. The Pope would issue an edict, and he would say, "You two good Catholic nations, stop fighting among yourselves. You're both authorized to reduce to servitude all infidel people." Now, the justification for the slave trade had been set in motion. Portugal had achieved a minor victory in the Battle of Ceuta by capturing a small enclave in Morocco. Portugal had freed itself from the domination of the Africans and the Arabs. 1240. The Africans then, the Almoravids, had been challenged that same year by another group of Islamic warriors, the Almohades. We stand the land whose were the story of the Moors in Spain. Read John Jackson's chapter on this called Africa and the Civilizing of Europe. Because there are many good works on this subject, dealing with the resurgence of Europe in the world. The Europeans began to come down the coast of West Africa, and most of the Portuguese, 1438, they began to take slaves out of Africa. In 1442, the nations in inner West Africa, Ghana, Mali, Masange, had a golden age, not only doing the slave trade, but in spite of the slave trade. And we keep missing this. We think the slave trade, nothing else happened. The great city-states in West and East Africa continued until the Arabs began to destroy from the north and the Portuguese moved up from the south. Then the Portuguese and Arabs met, therefore forming the largest slave trading post in East Africa, one of the largest in the world, at Zanzibar, mostly by the Arabs from Kuwait and the Arabs from Oman. Omani Arabs and Kuwaiti slave trade. Now you can have sympathy for Kuwait, and I think you might need to. But don't forget now, the Arab slave trade lasted 1,000 years before the European slave trade. Ask your Islamic brothers to do a little investigating on it, and if they want to read something, you want to tell them, read UNESCO documents 2 called Slave Trading in the Indian Ocean. And tell them also, if you want some additional material, read Sir Harry Johnson's The Colonization of Africa by Alien Races, and Sir Roger Copeland's work, East Africa and its Invaders, and the Cambridge History of East Africa. And if they say that all you're telling me about reading Whitey's books, you tell them that there's some extensive work in history that getting from Whitey or Black haven't had time to write. We don't get those grants. We don't get the kind of grants we can sit down and devote 3 years to one class. We don't get that kind of money. If we get enough money at all, it might cover us for a year. And we got to go back to the classroom and get our rent paid. See, we're very human beings, you know. That we can't go to the electric company and say, I'm a scholar, so I'm not paying my electric bill this month. We get put in here and save us out. My point is that now we're reaching a high point in the concept of race to justify the slave trade and the colonial system that would follow. A lot of this justification, this rationalization, is coming out of Europe. A lot is coming out of the Catholic Church. I don't think I'm beating up on the Catholic Church because England was in a swing position between Catholicism and Protestantism. And if you think the Catholics were bad now, you wait till those English got in there. They did it better. They were organized gangsters, I mean, they territory. I mean, they sailed up the Gambia River, took 10 miles on each part, on each side, established their trade. They made the slave trade a business, cold-blooded business. This African slave trade helped in the economic rebirth of Europe. Haiti and Jamaica but 1/3 of the economic wealth of the colonial power, then coming from those 2 islands. They had the greatest amount of slave revolts, mainly because they were pinched the hardest and pushed the hardest. Race was a factor now is becoming a kind of a justification. People that the slave preach, but says slaves obey your master. That's the main thing they want them to listen to. They destroyed his gods, now they want him to listen to another god. In the United States, they outlawed the drum, they outlawed any form of African fractions. They weren't quite as ruthless in the West Indies, but ruthless enough. Now we see race and color playing a major role in the expansion of Europe in the outer world and the recovery of Europe in the outer world. You should read Father Bartholomew de las Casas' little work, The Disruption of the Indies. He tells you of the impact of Columbus on this part of the world. He says from 12 to 25 million indigenous Americans were put to death. He described the encounter in Mexico. He's called the first historian of the New World. The book was so devastating, the Pope had it brought to Rome and locked the manuscript up for 200 years, nobody could read it. And right now, if you go to a good library and ask for it, somebody will look at you kind of strange. You should make a mission to ask for these old books. Father Bartholomew de las Casas, The Disruption of the Indies. And read the books about Father de las Casas. Read some of the new things on Christopher Columbus. I'm sorry that Michael Bradley's book, The Columbus Conspiracy, has not been published in the United States. I was promised last year that the book would be out in January. No attempt seemed to be made to get it out. This would be the ideal time to get it out. I read the book thoroughly. I enjoyed it because Christopher Columbus was my favorite anti-Western heroes. I think one of the great fakes of history. Even before I read Michael Bradley's book. I researched him again after he gave me some new information to dig up. There's also a book called Conquest of Paradise about Columbus. There is documents on West Indian history by Eric Williams. Now I'm going to close in something that has no ending anyway. One thing about the Baptist tradition, you take your text, you leave your text, you come back to it before the end and let people know that you know your text. But once you get started, it's hard to stop. What I'm saying is that we have survived the longest Holocaust in history.
That's right, that's right.
And let no one say they have a monopoly on the word Holocaust. Faith has not spared us for some casual reason. Some people have been hit less than we, and they're now extinct. We need to look beyond tonight's lecture. We need to look at the racism and the expansion of Europeans to the Pacific. The wholesale murder of people in the Pacific, the destruction of people on the island of Tasmania, people in India. We need to take a holistic world view of the tremendous cost to the world for European expansion. And it wasn't necessary. I maintain that had Europe entered a genuine partnership with the people of the world, slavery wouldn't have been necessary, racism wouldn't have been necessary. They would not have had to turn their souls into pretzels in order to create a rationale for that world domination. The domination of the world by any one people is rather stupid. And any one people who think they must dominate the world must be terribly insecure. It was not your bravery that brought this about, it is its fear. Its lack of bravery. Not the man which it might think the lack of it. Then what will we do in the world of tomorrow, considering there's a billion of us on the face of the earth? We have to start producing instead of consuming everything. We must reclaim the continent of Africa, all 12 million square miles of it. We must create the kind of humanity where all men can walk in peace and walk with dignity. I didn't say forget and I didn't say forgive. And I'm not advocating non-violence.
Very good.
I'm advocating the strategic use of violence whenever it is necessary for your self-defense.
All right.
We have great gifts for the world. Years ago, when history was young, the great river valleys of Africa, we sent people down the Nile from inner Africa who formed a composite nation, later known to the world as Egypt. That nation and its literature laid the basis of so much that we know as the world's religion and its social thought, and so much that we now call a civilized state and humane thought. What we have to do is to form a partnership with ourselves. I say, find a mirror and look at that partner staring back at you and say with confidence, partner, you and I start a revolution to change the world. We choose to do it right now.
All right.
Dr. Clarke has given us a wonder.
That's right.
To behold and a wonder of this world, and telling us how to deal and how to move forward and how to go in this struggle and in this battle. I'm ready to give him another whoo hoo hoo. Before we go into our question and answer period, there are a few things that Elder Brown wants me to say to you as a group. Now, this is not the only great lecture series that has been sponsored by our host group of people. In the past, we've had Dr. Ben Levy, Steve Coakley, Dr. Kunjufu, the late Dr. Klugman, Dr. Milton Brown, Reverend Lucas, Ivan Van Sertimer, Dr. Sertimer, Bob Law, and there have been many. Oh yeah.
Dr. Ben.
Did I forget? Joseph Ben Yakin. Okay? I don't want to forget nobody. But we've had some great